Today I want to explore the probability that Christianity is the one true religion. After 2,000 plus years, we can finally examine the entirety of Christian belief as a complete package. The only conclusion that can be drawn is that Christianity has a 0% chance of being true. Let me be clear that I am not saying there is a 0% chance that God exists. That is something quite different. Arguments for the existence of a creator in no way establishes that it is the omnipotent, omniscient, tri-headed God described by Christianity. The truth of Christianity is revealed not in what apologists defend, but in what they ignore. Beginning near the end of the first century, apologists for Christianity began constructing an elaborate defense of their beliefs. Each argument was designed to combat a particular charge or heresy with the assertion of doctrine that needed to be accepted by all Orthodox Christians. Layer upon layer of doctrine gradually built up over time, and the theology became increasingly complex as each argument had to take into consideration not only the particular charge or heretical claim it was addressing, but also needed to fit with all the other arguments, beliefs, and doctrines layered beneath it. The first point that becomes clear is that if the person who constructed the basic model of Christianity was actually correct, none of this doctrine would be necessary. The Apostle Paul laid out the core of Christian belief while founding a number of churches around Asia Minor. Paul's essential message was that the man who was executed a few years prior was the Messiah sent by God. The proof of this was revealed by his resurrection and ascension to heaven. Confirmation of this proof would come shortly when Christ returned to gather up all those who believed and return with them to heaven. That this never occurred provides our first glimpse at the truth of Christianity. Paul was very clear that the resurrection would occur while he and his new Christian converts were still alive. When Christians began dying without any resurrection materializing, Paul explained that the dead would simply be asleep until Christ's return, at which point they would ascend to heaven, followed shortly by the living believers. This presented a major problem for later Christians, who developed the view that Christians immediately upon death ascend to heaven. This was much more palatable to Christians trying to win converts and to make their lives more bearable. But to believe that Christians ascend directly to heaven upon death presents enormous contradictions that even early church fathers such as Augustine recognized. First, the Apostolic Creed held that Jesus spent the 2 to 3 days after death and before resurrection in Sheol, the Jewish version of hell, meaning that he did not go directly to heaven, at least not body and soul. Second, Augustine correctly noted that if Christians go directly to heaven upon death, what is the point of Christ's return? The centerpiece of Paul's theology became an inconsequential afterthought. All of a sudden, Christ never had to return for Christians to still reap all of the benefits of an afterlife. This view trounced Paul's version of Christian truth and is a major hole that never gets plugged. In the book of Revelation, the souls of the martyred are waiting under the altar for the day of judgment. This seems to confirm Paul's version, contradicting the new convenient view espoused by later Christians. It forced the early church to assert that suicide, a rational alternative given the circumstances, had to be treated as a mortal sin. The ridiculous outcome of this whole materializes in the apocalyptic writings such as the Left Behind series of popular Christian literature. If Christians are going to heaven directly upon death, why the hell care about a second coming? Paul made two other assertions that have left unplugged holes. In asserting that the God of the Jews was actually the God of the Gentiles, Paul claimed a universal and fair creator would not favor just one segment of his creation. But throughout history, more humans would die never hearing about Christ, thus never knowing they could be saved. Paul makes exactly the same error he claimed the Jews made, because the bulk of the world's population would not be made aware of this new universal Savior either. The unfair God of the Jews was the equally unfair God of the Roman Gentiles, because Paul had no idea what lied beyond the borders of the Roman Empire. And in trying to separate Gentiles from Jews, Paul claimed circumcision was unnecessary, given that Abraham was righteous before God and before he was circumcised. This, though, is directly contradicted by Genesis chapter 17, where God gave Abraham a direct commandment to be circumcised. It had nothing to do with Mosaic law. In fact, nothing to do with Judaism. Paul simply ignored the scriptures because circumcision was not something these Gentiles wanted to deal with. Paul made conversion to Christianity convenient, if dubious. All of these holes pale compared to the one created by the gospel according to John. John's gospel provided the bridge, allowing Christians to continue living in a world with no expectation of Christ's return. Jesus was elevated to the level of God. He was no longer merely a man, he was God. But John's description undermines the notion of a suffering human. And all-knowing Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen to him. Jesus knew that after his execution, he'd be returning to heaven. This divine knowledge that the pain endured on earth would be temporary, followed by eternal glorification in heaven, makes Jesus' suffering seem trivial. Christians ever since have tried to emphasize Jesus' pain by performing passion plays, reenacting Jesus' punishment and crucifixion, to try and emphasize that Jesus really did suffer. It is clear that the Pauline version was not the complete package. It stopped being that when Paul died. What arose to fill the holes was doctrine. Doctrine allowed Orthodox Christian theologians to answer all the tricky questions, except one. Is all this doctrine really necessary? Christians assert that believing in Jesus means believing Jesus is God. Really? Why? All one need do is ask, can I still believe Christ saved me if I don't believe in these doctrines? The answer, of course, is absolutely. A Son of God conceived and put on earth by God in heaven as a fully human being is just as capable of providing the salvation Paul said was necessary. In fact, he is more capable because his pain comes without the knowledge of a rescue and eternal glorification. It is truly a sacrifice. This reveals the true nature of Christianity. All the later man-made doctrines are integral in establishing a religion, but they can be dispensed with without losing anything of the core message that God sent a sacrificial lamb to redeem humanity for the stain of original sin. Yet this is the only belief, fundamental and necessary, and it derives directly from the Apostle Paul, who we already know was wrong. The reason there are so many strands of Christianity is because they all derived from men trying to find alternative structures and logic to conceal the fact that the core of Christianity is wrong. They need Paul's theology for there to be any semblance of a religious foundation. Yet with Paul's theology, they end up with nothing but failed reasoning, unfulfilled predictions, and a foundation that is simply not true.